devil are you? It's the Deck Talking Devil back with another episode of weekly book review or recommended reading series that I've been doing here lately. If you saw the short, you will have known that I was gonna be reviewing a book by Israel Finkelstein and Silberman. So I will be reviewing that book today, along with another one that I decided to throw in because whenever I read the book by Finkelstein and Silberman, I always read this other book in conjunction with that one because I think the balance is there and they pair well together. So before I get into that, I wanted to let you know, go ahead and hit that like button. Share, subscribe, turn on the notifications so the next time there's a new video, you'll be the first to know. Well. I don't like to waste time, so how about we get right into it? This week's book review. Alright, The Bible Unearthed by Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman. This is the book that I showed in the short, telling you guys I'd be reviewing. And here's the other book that I wanted to throw in there with this one. So that's it. Biblical History in Israel's Past. Alright, by Megan Bishop Moore and Brad Kelly. These are two excellent books. Alright, I got a knock the last time I did a book review by a Hebrew Israelite. I think I was doing the book about Barack Obama versus the black Hebrew Israelites or something like that. And the guy in the comments knocked me saying, hey, you never did review the book. You spent more time talking about your experience with black Hebrew Israelites and never really reviewed the book. And that's true. I never really went into the details about what the book said because my experience with Hebrew Israelites paired so well with what was going on in the book that I didn't feel the need to expound a lot on what the book was saying, because it was summed up pretty much in my experience with Hebrew Israelites. But the book does go into a lot of detail about the history of the black Hebrew Israelites or Hebrew Israelism here in America. Abba Bivens and D.S. Cherry or F.S. Cherry and all of the other ones who's responsible for the origins of that here in America. So that's just to recap the last book review. Now to get into these puppies here. Who is this book for? I would say that if you are a Christian, I would strongly recommend you read this book. If you are on the fence, let's say you started like I did, getting some questions, growing suspicions, having some doubts, and wanted to fortify your position as a Christian, which that's how I started out, right? I wanted to prove the validity of my religion. I would recommend this book for you too. Because what we should be doing, if we're sincere about finding truth and not just upholding positions or upholding religious ideologies and theologies, what we should be doing is being neutral and reading or following the evidence wherever it leads, which means that if I wanted to verify the authenticity of the biblical text, then I need to find out some critical information about the text, such as when was it written, who wrote it, where was it written, because these are some of the things that came into question when I started doing my own research. I came across a lot of information that suggested that the Bible was based off of plagiarized stories from surrounding nations and things of this nature. Things, for instance, like the book of Proverbs had been pretty much lifted from the teachings of Ptahhotep. Things of that nature. That's the kind of stuff I started coming across. Now, I would say the argument for such things are not as strong as I would have liked them to be. However, it's still enough there that a case can be made to support it. Alright, so I'm not outright rejecting the claim that the biblical text was lifted from other places intentionally, blatantly. I'm not rejecting that at all. I'm just saying the evidence to support it is sparse. There is some, but you could almost dismiss a lot of the instances as influence and not plagiarism, which is different. It's a different thing. I don't think anyone can argue that the Bible bears no influence from the surrounding nations. I don't think that position's tenable at all. You have to see in the biblical text influence from the surrounding nations over the things that went into the Bible. So in this book, Finkelstein deals with archaeology. Finkelstein's an archaeologist, and Silberman is a historian. All right, but they approach this thing. They take a different approach. They go through what archaeology should be seeking to find, and how you should approach archaeology, the methodology of past and present archaeologists, and some of the strengths and weaknesses of their approach to finding truth. It's often said that archaeologists back in the day would go to a dig site with the Bible in one hand and the plow or shovel in the other hand, meaning they were using the Bible to interpret the evidence, to interpret the findings. Whatever they dug up and found, they looked for it in the Bible and used the Bible to validate what it was that they found, which is not how you should do archaeology, and not how you should study history. You cannot start with a conclusion and then go out and find evidence to support it. That's not proper methodology. All right, that's not the way it should be done. So they address that. They address a lot of the early theories about the history of Israel. How did Israel come to be? One of the important questions that you come across is, were the Israelites Canaanites? Because in the Hebrew Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, their perspective of the Canaanites is that the Canaanites are a wicked, idolatrous people, and they're despised by God as well as the Israelites. And so there's this disdain for the Canaanites. But when you start to look at the archaeology, it starts to suggest that the Israelites were in fact Canaanites. And so this hate, this dislike, this disapproval for the Canaanites is just a way for them to dissonance and inject dissonance, cognitive dissonance from their early past. So I would say that Finkelstein kind of holds the line there. He doesn't necessarily support outright that they were Canaanites, but I think that his overall feeling about the issue is that it is very likely that they were Canaanites, but the evidence there is he wish it was more evidence there to support it. So he goes into things like Joshua, when Joshua was supposed to go in and conquer all of these nations in order to acquire the promised land that Yahweh had promised to them. He talks about this. This is what we call the unified conquest theory, where it's theorized by archaeologists that it happened just as it was said that it happened in the Bible. That these people formed an army basically and went into all of these places and ravaged the places and won victoriously in war. They conquered and claimed these lands just as it's laid out in the Bible. Now, I hope for your sake that version isn't true if you believe the Bible. Because nowhere else in the biblical text do I find it more disturbing and grotesque, more immoral and heinous acts being committed than there. So I hope for your sakes, if you believe in the Bible, that part's actually false, that theory is not how they ended up in these lands. And evidence in archaeology supports the fact that that's not the case. Matter of fact, Pharaoh Shishak, had a partial stele erected in Canaan, listing the various victories and stuff that he had conquering these different cities and things during the time where supposedly it was Israel going about doing the conquering. There's a lot of evidence against this conquest theory. Then you had a theory like peaceful infiltration, where they were living out on the outskirts and different techniques like plastering the inside of these, in the army we would have called them a water buffalo. It's basically like made out of animal skin, like a cistern, I guess is the term that they would use back then. But they came up with different ways of plastering the cistern in order to hold water for longer periods of time, and they developed ways to form up in the mountainous regions, up in the hilly sides of the mountains and things like that. And this is what allowed them to persist in that area and kind of stay on the outskirts and not really get in the mix of the inner city and stuff. And so they slowly began to infiltrate into the populace. So you had these different theories. One thing that I want to do though, because I want to read something directly out of the text. All right. And then we'll go on to the next book. Because one thing that you have to really be mindful of is what is the consensus among scholars about when this book was written and who wrote this book. What's the consensus? I'm going to read one small or two little pieces here, two small excerpts out of the book, just a few sentences each. And so here's the first one, and I want to show you that I'm actually reading out of the book. Okay. All right. Hopefully you can see that. So under this section is called some telltale sign or telltale anachronisms. Some telltale anachronisms. The critical textual scholar who had identified distinct sources underlying the text of Genesis insisted that the patriarchal narratives were put into writing at a relatively late date, at the time of the monarchy, which is the 10th, between the 10th and 8th centuries BCE, or even later in exilic and post-exilic days, the 6th and 5th century BCE. The biblical, I skipped the sentence here. The German biblical scholar Julius Wellhausen argued that the stories of the patriarchs in both the J and E documents reflected the concerns of the later Israelite monarchy, which were projected onto the lives of legendary fathers in a largely mythical past. The biblical story should thus be regarded as a national mythology with no more historical basis than the Homeric saga of Odysseus' travels or Virgil's saga of Aeneas' founding of Rome. It's a myth. Alright? And it should be interpreted as a myth. What you're dealing with here is the people of Israel after the Babylonian captivity. As they're coming back into their land, they have been disconnected from their history. Now, black people in America can understand this 100%. Right? Coming out of slavery, we had been disconnected from our ancestry and our early history, and had been taught that our history began at slavery, and the things prior to slavery we had no knowledge of. So we had to go back and find our identity on the canvas of history. Okay? And so it's this ever churning journey of re-identification. Alright? Reconnecting. Plugging in to the source again, into the cultural history. Alright? So we understand this, and this is exactly what was happening in early Israel. They had been in captivity in Babylon for all of these years and had been separated from their history, from their past. So what do they do when they come out of Babylon? They create, they invent history. Alright, we have to come up with a way to explain how it is that we're in this land and where we came from, because we've lost that connection. And so they had to create it, I don't want to say out of whole cloth, but they had to create the bulk of it. Basically a cultural myth, a national myth. These aren't my words. They're right here in the book. Let's see if you can see it, because I'm not making it up. You see the highlighted portion here? The biblical narratives should be regarded as a national mythology. Alright? Not my words. So please don't shoot the messenger. I'm just delivering the message that the archaeologists and the historians have presented to us. Right? This is the consensus. This is not just his opinion. This is the consensus among scholars. Another thing that supports this date, the date when this stuff was written, is very, very important. So excuse me if I'm harping on it for a moment, but I think that it is critical, absolutely critical, to the authenticity of the text. One last part that I'm going to read. So he's talking about the compilation of the Bible and when it was written. And so far he's presented two date ranges. between the 10th and 8th centuries BCE and between the 6th and 5th century BCE. All right, the consensus of scholarship places it somewhere around 800 to 700 BCE. All right, but when did the compilation take place? The biblical text reveals some clear clues that can narrow down the time of its final composition. Take the repeated mention of camels, for instance. The stories of the patriarchs are packed with camels, usually herds of camels, but as in the story of Joseph's sale by his brothers into slavery, found in Genesis 37:25, camels are also described as beasts of burdens used in a caravan. We know through archaeology that camels were not domesticated as beasts of burdens earlier than the late second millennium and were not widely used in that capacity in the Near East, ancient Near East, until well after 1000 BCE. This is putting us back into the 8th and 7th century BCE. And an even more telling detail, the camel caravan carrying gum, balm, and myrrh in the Joseph story reveals an obvious familiarity with the main products of the lucrative Arabian trade that flourished under the supervision of the Assyrian empires in the 8th and 7th century BCE. Drop the mic. I don't know what else to tell you, man. This book is great. Now, when you're doing research, you have to do honest, unbiased research to the best of your ability. I think that all of us come in with some presumptions, and some biases, but you have to try to be as unbiased as possible. And one critique of this book is that it's old. All right, the book is old. It's about 20 years old. It was written in 2001. So this book is old. And whenever you're dealing with scholarship, you want to stay abreast to all of the newest, most recent information. So I wanted to throw a book in that's half that age, that was written in 2011. And this book right here, all right, this book right here, Biblical History in Israel's Past, by Megan Bishop Moore and Brad Kelly. All right, Brad Kelly is a scholar. He's a professor at some Point Loma Nazarene University. All right. And Megan Bishop Moore is just an independent researcher and scholar. So that's their credentials there. I bring up this book because whenever I read Finkelstein and Silverman's book, I read this book as well. Because this book by Moore and Kelly, this book, what they've done really is compiled all of at that time, the consensus of scholarship on various subjects pertaining to the Bible, such as the peaceful infiltration, such as the conquest, such as the United Monarchy, whether or not David and Solomon even existed, was there ever an Exodus, and all of this kind of stuff is dealt with in both of these books. But in this book, you're really getting it from two scholars. Now, they source a lot of material in here. They provide the sources for it, and one of the best parts about this book to me are the appendices in the back. All right, you go back in the back, and I want to say it's appendix A through E back here. Yeah. I've already read these appendices, and they have some great information back here. Do not skip reading the appendix in the back. All right, none of them. They're really good, chock full of information and more sources as well. But Megan Bishop Moore and Brad Kelly in this book, they basically compiled the scholarship at the time, the consensus among scholars at the time. And this book was written in 2011, so 10 years newer than the book by Finkelstein. So it's more updated. And they took a lot of different perspectives from the leading scholars on each issue, and they laid it out for you. Okay, here's his argument. Here's the weaknesses in his argument. Here's the strengths of this argument. And they really dealt with all of these different arguments and the evidence supporting various things. Now, the conclusion reached in this book as well does no good to the biblical text as far as the date of compilation, because, like I say, they're just following the consensus of scholarship. And so, and I'm not talking about atheistic scholars, because that's a big one there. You know, people want to claim, well, these are atheists, and you know, you can't listen to anything they say because they're atheists, and it's their mission to disprove God, and so of course they're gonna interpret. No. I'm not talking about atheistic scholars per se. Some scholars may be atheists. That should have no bearing on the scholarship if the methodology is correct, right? Some scholars can be believers, and as long as they have proper methodology and follow the evidence, then I don't have an issue with them. It's when you allow your religious belief or lack thereof to dictate to you how to interpret evidence. That's when you're off. Okay, and that's when I reject your scholarship altogether. What they've done in here is followed the scholarship, the evidence, compiled it, and presented it to us, so that you now have the consensus of scholarship on a plethora of issues and topics pertaining to the Bible, compiled in one source that's user-friendly. You know, it's easy to navigate and interpret. But like I say, they still don't do any favors to the Christian text or the biblical text. And I'm going to read just a small portion here of the text that's I got underlined in here, because they support the conclusion reached for the compilation that I just read to you from Finkelstein's book. So listen to this. First, claiming that a large part of the Hebrew Old Testament was written in the Persian period places the recording and retelling of many events reported in the Bible far away chronologically from their reported occurrence. Historians almost universally subscribe to the idea that contemporaneous or near contemporaneous accounts are more likely to be accurate than later ones. Thus, dating the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, to the Persian period means that serious questions about the reliability of its reports could be raised. The hypothesis also sets the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament's formation in one particular cultural milieu. Rather than the Bible being a collection of the origin stories, events, people, prophecies, and tales important to the Iron Age kingdoms of Israel and Judah that was passed along over the centuries, it becomes a collection of stories that were formed to give an identity to the Jewish elite during the Persian period. Historians overwhelmingly identify these people with the returnees, people who saw themselves or wanted to see themselves as connected to an ancient Israel and Judah even though their connection to these kingdoms had been interrupted and was very distant. This is another drop the mic. All right. What they just said in a nutshell, if you didn't have time to really break that down, is that what we have in the Bible had been looked at as being oral tradition. This is what we hear all the time. It's oral tradition that's been passed on from centuries, from generation to generation. It's been passed on for millennia. And the record keeping was real nice and neat and tidy. And that's what you have in the Bible. It's the oral tradition that had been written down, or at least part of it, because Jews still believe in what's called the oral Torah, which is different from the written Torah. All right? Neither here nor there. Believers of the Bible believe that the Bible is just a compilation of events that happened to Israel over all of these different generations of time. And these records have been kept meticulously by the Israelite people. Not the case. By dating this, by proving that this has been written in the Persian period, it forces you to realize, this is according to the author, I'm just rephrasing exactly what they said in the book. All right? It forces you to realize that this is not the case. Rather, this whole history was written by one group of people at one single point in history. All right? Who had just been released from Babylonian captivity and now needed to create a history for themselves. Because whatever their history is or had been prior to Babylonian captivity, they had been separated from it. And so now they had to go back and create a history and project it onto people who could have been historical, right? So a Moses could have been historical, could have been a guy who actually lived, and could have been an important figure in Israelite history or in Hebrew history. But what they did was create a story, a mythology, and project that mythology onto this ordinary dude who was important to them. And now they've made a mythical past of a sorcerer for Yahweh, who throwing down his staff and is turning into snakes. He's hearkening in, he's the harbinger of plagues and uprisings and turmoil, and he's ultimately victorious over the most powerful entity in the world at that time. They created this history out of whole cloth and projected it back, interpolated anachronistically, applied this later created history onto people who could have been historical. This is the same thing that I claim happened with Jesus in the case of Jesus. I don't care if he existed, right? When you go to Josephus, because this is what a lot of people want to go to Josephus, right? And they want to say, testimony in Flavianus. And Josephus bears witness to Jesus' existence and all of this here. I do not care if he existed. If there was a man named Jesus who existed at this time, he was a normal man. That is my point. The mythology that was created after he had died. This is the point. The Israelites have been doing this since 7th century BCE. Find a guy who actually existed, who we think was important, and create a myth, a mythology, and project it onto that ordinary guy's life. Same thing was done with Jesus. Josephus does not just mention one Jesus in here. It's about 6 of them. And they range from magicians to leaders of rebellions, political figures, strong leaders, whatever. All different types of people doing magic tricks and healings and all of this stuff. And so what we see in the Bible, in the New Testament, is what could be conceived as an amalgamation of all of the different characters named Jesus into one being. After the fact, post hoc rationalization, where you try to rationalize something that happened in the past, something after the fact. Now you try to interpret it based in a new light gained after the events already happened. This is what we see in the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation. All right. So maybe you can tell that this is something that I'm passionate about, because here we sit almost 40 minutes in and I'm warming up. I can go in some more. But all I want to do in videos like this is just review the books. Just present the books to you. Right? Here's the books. You see them. Alright, you got it? Yeah. Alright. You got it. I recommend these books. If it's not obvious, okay? I recommend the books. I think you'll get a lot out of those books. And those aren't the only two, you know. I'm pretty sure you could see. I like books because I believe in order to find truth, you have to actually pursue it. You have to go out and obtain the knowledge, the fruits of the labor of the people who are out in these different fields of scholarship doing the work. You have to put that information in front of you and start to read through it, interpret it, digest it, and form your own conclusions based on the evidence. So, did the ancient patriarchs, the Israelite patriarchs, exist? Was there ever an exodus out of Egypt? Was there a worldwide flood? Did David and Solomon have one of the greatest monarchies in the history of the world? Was it extensive and as robust and as wealthy as they claim? Or was all of these stories just invented in order to provide an identity for a nation who had just been taken or just been released from captivity, separated from their previous identity in history? What makes the most sense to you, and what does the evidence support? That's what I'm concerned about. And if you care genuinely about believing as many true things and as few false things as possible, then that's what you'll care about as well. What does the evidence say? Alright, that's it. I'm the Deck Talking Devil. This has been another weekly book review or recommended reading, and hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comment section below, and if you have any more books along these lines that you would like me to review or bring out, or that you think would help people who's reading, trying to find truth in these areas and on these topics, please let us know in the comment section. Like, subscribe, turn on the notifications so the next time there's a new video, you'll be the first to know. Until next time, keep learning, my friend.